After about 3 hours into a competitive session, I realized my hands weren't cramping, and that's when I understood that this controller was actually built for. The first thing that hits you is the weight, or the lack of it. At 220 grams, the Razer Wolverine V3 Tournament Edition 8K feels almost hollow compared to the Xbox controller I was using before, but not in a cheap way. It's a deliberate lightness that makes sense after a few matches when your wrists aren't screaming at you. The surface has this textured matte finish that doesn't collect oils the way glossy plastic do, though the embossed Razer logo in the center does catch fingerprints if you're not careful. The face buttons are made from PVT, the same material used in high-end mechanical keyboard keycaps, and they have this satisfying clicky resistance under your fingers. Almost like pressing a mouse button. The triggers lock with an audible little snap, and when they're engaged, they move maybe 2 millimeters before registering, which feels absurdly fast. The grips are shorter than you'd expect, almost stubby, and my hands aren't even that large. It takes a session or two before you stop noticing it. But once muscle memory kicks in, the compact frame starts to make sense for quick repetitive movements. The cable is a thick braided 10-foot cord that doesn't tangle easily, though it does have a slight stiffness to it that tugs at the controller if you're sitting too far from your PC. The first time I loaded into a match of Call of Duty with the 8000Hz polling rate enabled, I immediately felt like my sensitivity was cranked way higher than it actually was. It wasn't. The controller was just responding so fast that every micro adjustment I made with the thumbstick registered instantly, and it threw me off the first few games. The TMR analog sticks are noticeably smoother than the Hall effect sticks on the Xbox Elite Series 2, with less of the magnetic resistance you get used to on other premium controllers. They feel more natural out of the box, which is rare. The back paddles sit right where your middle fingers naturally curl, and they've got the same mouse click feel as the face buttons. Sharp, immediate, no mush. Compared to the Elite Series 2, which has a softer, more cushioned button press, the Wolverine V3 Tournament Edition 8K feels surgical. One thing that kept catching me off guard though is the rumble, or more specifically, how rough it feels. It's not smooth haptic feedback, it's more like an old phone vibrating against a table. It's not a deal breaker, but after coming from controllers with refined haptics, it stands out in a way that feels unfinished. When you scroll through the product page, Razer really hammers home the 8000Hz polling rate. And honestly, that does match the experience. They make it sound like you're unlocking some hidden competitive edge, and in a way you are, but only if you're already playing at a level where milliseconds matter. What's interesting is how little emphasis they put on the weight reduction, even though that's one of the most noticeable improvements when you actually use it day to day. They quietly mention the removal of vibration motors as a pro feature, but for most people, that's going to feel like a missing feature, not an upgrade. The page also makes a big deal out of the Mecha-Tactile buttons, which do feel great, but they don't really explain what that means in practice. It's just marketing language until you actually click one and realize it feels like a gaming mouse. It's always interesting what brands choose to spotlight versus what they assume you'll figure out on your own. After the first week, I stopped thinking about the controller and just played, which is a good sign. It became the one I reached for automatically, especially during ranked sessions where inputs need to be fast and consistent. The trigger locks became second nature faster than I expected, and I found myself leaving them on even in single-player games where they weren't strictly necessary. One thing I didn't expect to appreciate was how the cable actually kept me from slouching back too far in my chair. It sounds silly, but it created this subtle posture anchor that made longer sessions feel less draining. The controller doesn't get warm in your hands, the way wireless ones do when the battery's working hard, which I only noticed after switching back to my old setup for a night. By day 5, my reaction times in fast-paced shooters felt tighter, though it's hard to say how much of that was the 8K polling and how much was just getting comfortable with the layout. It's the kind of thing you stop thinking about while using it, in a good way. You don't really notice how much it changes your setup until you go back to something else. The rumble motors are refined, almost harsh, like they're rattling instead of vibrating. It's not a deal breaker, but it's one of those small things that only becomes obvious after a few hours, especially if you're coming from a controller with modern haptics. The cable connection isn't always reliable either. A few times during testing, the controller randomly disconnected for a second or two, which in a competitive match is basically a death sentence. It doesn't happen often, but when it does, it's frustrating because you expect a wired connection to be bulletproof. The short grip handles take real adjustment time, and if you have larger hands, it might never feel quite right. It doesn't ruin the experience, but it's there. If you're the kind of person who plays competitive shooters or fast-paced multiplayer games where reaction time matters, this is absolutely worth the investment. The 8K polling rate and lightweight build are designed for people who are already past the casual level and want hardware that can keep up with their skill. But if you're again in days mostly single-player story games or slower-paced experiences, the difference may not justify the price over a standard Xbox controller. There's a quiet satisfaction in knowing your inputs are landing exactly when you intend them to. No delay, no second guessing, just you and the game.